And now let's segue into the session. So we just had a really great conversation on how recognition shows up in the frontline world. There were lots of practical insights that Marlon, Rebecca, Angie, and Aaron all shared, lots of creative approaches to meaningful recognition. And so now we just love to shift gears a little and zoom out and look at recognition from a leadership perspective. One of the most common questions we do hear is, how do I get leadership buy-in for recognition, or how can I get leaders to recognize their teams more? And so we thought that these themes would be really great to be explored with leaders who are doing work in this area. And so please join me in welcoming Kelly Riddell, who's the Vice President of People and Culture at Momentum Financial Services Group, and they're part of the Bucketlist family, as well as Daphne Cow, who is the Vice President of Human Resources at Waypoint Insurance. And to facilitate this conversation, we have Jane Van Sickle, who is the VP of Sales here at Bucketlist. And Jane, you work closely with HR and leadership teams every day. So very keen to hear your thoughts and your experiences in this as well. And so to kick the session off, Jane, I'll hand it over to you and to the panel for some more brief introductions. I just gave like a quick one-liner, but there's so much more that I would love to hear about. For example, a bit about the current organization you're working with, your team, and a bit about the journey that's led you here. And Jane, feel free to start first since you're facilitating.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca. And in the spirit of recognition, I'd like to recognize Becca because she has put in so much work to organizing this event. And so we thank her for all of that hard work. So I'm Jane Van Sickle. I'm the VP of Sales at Bucketlist, and really excited to be hosting this panel today in meeting with Daphne and Kelly before. I know they have a wealth of information and you're going to get some valuable and actionable insights out of this. And so Daphne, I'll just turn it over to you quickly if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure. Thank you, Jane. So hi, everybody. I'm Daphne Cow. I'm the VP of HR at Waypoint Insurance, which is one of the largest insurance brokerages in British Columbia. And we are part of the Navicord family, which has brokerages across Canada. We are across 30 locations and a staff of about 800 within Waypoint, protecting what people love, their personal insurance, their auto insurance, and commercial assets for our clients. My experience in HR goes back almost 20 years. It includes both corporate environments and startups. So I've worked in the retail space, I've worked in the tech space, and I've worked in the professional services. And yeah, on a personal note, in my free time, I hang out with my partner and our daughter and our little dog, exploring beautiful British Columbia.
Thank you, Daphne. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Kelly Riddell. I am with Momentum Financial Services Group. We are the parent company for Money Mart. So we are located in Canada, the US, and we also have operations in India. I'm located just outside of Toronto, which is lovely and sunny today. In my role, I'm responsible for all things employee experience, which is something I'm very passionate about. I love my job and I love the team that I work with. I'm very excited to talk to you all today about recognition.
Great, thank you. Well, let's jump into our first question, and I'll take a pretty high level. And I'd like to talk about why you both think that recognition matters, and if there's a moment that stands out either for you as far as recognition you received in your career, or that a moment where you've seen someone else receive recognition.
Sure, I can go first and maybe we'll go back and forth with Kelly. So for me, I think regular recognition really shows that our employees' contributions are being valued. For my company specifically, we've gone through a lot of change in terms of organic growth, but also through mergers and acquisitions. So while overall growth is a really great problem to have, it's still change. And it means change for people in the way they work and in processes and how they work. So we found that in all the busy and all the growth, recognition can't just be done off the side of our desk as leaders or not done at all. So we want to make sure our employees are recognized as they're going through this employment journey. So even though they're part of a larger organization, their contributions matter. Even if it's small, everything adds up to the whole. So that's kind of the message that we're relaying, that it's the intentionality of working towards that difference. The bite-sized pieces of the recognition adds up to the whole.
I would add to that. I think recognition is important because we spend so much time at work. In a lot of cases, we spend more time at work than we do with our families, and it's important to feel appreciated and recognized for the work that you're doing and the hard effort that you're making. And I think that makes a big difference to somebody. I think each of us can think of a time where we had a leader who did appreciate us and how much more willing we were to go above and beyond for that person versus somebody who never says thank you and doesn't acknowledge your hard work. You're not as likely to log in late for that person. So I think that's really important just from an individual perspective that we feel appreciated, but from a business perspective, it also makes sense. And like I said, individually, we can all think of a time where someone did something that was, a great recognition for you. And I think one of the things that makes recognition kind of really stand out to people is when it's personalized. You are recognizing a specific thing that that person did. And if you're attaching, something to the recognition, whether it's a gift or something like that, that if it's specific and individual to that person, that just makes it that much more impactful. So I think recognition is absolutely very important.
What I heard is that recognition needs to be intentional, both from peer to peer and leader to report. I think we've all heard the saying that people quit their leader, right? And it's recognition that's a big part of making people feel valued. And so I think we can all agree on how important it is to have a culture of recognition. But I think that sometimes that we see is with HR leaders, it's how do you make recognition a strategic initiative as opposed to a HR function? And part of that is, I think, measurement, right? And it's like, how do you roll that up and say, here, recognition had this direct result on retention or turnover or what it is. So what do you think, Kelly, is the way to make it a strategic initiative, and what do you like to measure?
Yeah, great question. So I think, and this is very, very helpful for anybody who's looking to implement a recognition program and you're looking for kind of the business case to support that, to get it in place, because not all leaders see the value of recognition, but it's absolutely there. There was an amazing study done by Queen's and Gallup where they looked at the difference that engagement and recognition makes and how it directly impacts things like productivity, retention, accidents, errors, and defects in work that people are doing. So there's a significant number of business drivers that recognition and engagement directly impacts. And so when you position it in that way, it makes it kind of a very easy business case to make, and it definitely becomes a strategic driver. So when you look at, the typical things that HR is asked to improve in terms of metrics, first year turnover, overall turnover, attrition, engagement, things like that, productivity, time to productivity, recognition can play a key point in all of those different pieces, which I think is really important. And in terms of measuring that program, would be looking at, you have a program in place like Bucketlist, it's very easy to go to your dashboard and see your engagement, your recognitions, and things like that. But you can also measure it via engagement surveys or an NPS survey that you're doing, and then tie those back to, as you see those things go up, you are going to see, the studies have shown, you're going to see those other key metrics go down.
Great, thank you. And NPS it represents Net Promoter Score for those who don't use that. And Daphne, what would you like to share with everyone?
Yeah, I think from a leadership perspective, we really need to live and breathe it. So it starts from the top and it needs to cascade down. We oftentimes recognition is seen as it's a driver from HR, but it's not just an HR department pushing it through and dragging it along. Otherwise, it's not authentic, right? It needs to come from the top. So in my organization, we actually have this as a standing topic in our leadership agenda. So it's something that we share, whether what's working, what's not in our respective areas, or we brainstorm to resolve how we recognize employees based on a certain business complexity or issue that's going on. But for us, it's a standing leadership team agenda. And, our expectation is that it's going to continue to cascade down to each respective departments.
And is there any specific measurements that you're looking at, Daphne?
Yeah, same as like Kelly touched on. We look at turnover rate, we look at engagement score, so the ENPS score, and then we also conduct an annual engagement survey as well.
Okay, great, thank you. I think that you bring up a good point in that recognition has to come from top down. And you talked a little bit about strategy as far as it's a weekly thing. What advice would you have for people who maybe don't have buy-in from the top, or like obviously the weekly meeting's an idea. Any other recommendations on how to get that buy-in and really have the senior leaders lead by example?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes these metrics, if you're not using an engagement survey and stuff like that, other metrics are readily available, metrics and facts. Kelly shared some studies as well, which is always great to substantiate that. But, you can measure your own turnover and look at that. You can measure it by various departments or areas. So I would say you start with the facts that you have, and then you go from there.
Great, thank you. Kelly, I know you've done a few different recognition programs in a few of your jobs. Do you have any advice on getting the buy-in from the senior leadership?
Yep. Yeah, so exactly as Daphne said, the different stats and metrics you can come forward with that makes your business case for you. Queens and Gallup, Google it if you want, but that's a great study. There's lots of great facts in there around how recognition makes a difference. But I think also too, just talking to leaders around the fact that when you look at the different things that you want to improve in your workforce, again, key things across multiple industries, I think any industry would be, improving retention, improving productivity, the things like that, that's going to be impacted by retention. And then I think the second approach is really to talk to them about their own personal experience. And like I said at the start of our conversation, think about a leader when someone was recognizing your efforts and how much harder you would work for that person versus somebody who never said thank you to at all and how disengaged you were. We're in this environment of quiet quitters and all of that. So I think that's also a piece you can bring into that conversation, but getting them just to reflect on a personal level around how they were treated, gets them to see the value in doing recognition.
Yeah, and I think it's so important to have stats, right? And really the proof and the return on investment of having a recognition program. And I talk to so many HR leaders who are struggling to get that buy-in. And so it's often trying to help them. Well, what metrics do you have? And how can we impact them? So looking at reports, like you said, we also can share our own stats, but I think that's critical if you are looking to whether it's you want to get a platform or it's something manually you're doing. It's to get that budget is to really look at those stats that you want to impact and the proof of how recognition can help solve those. So on that note, when we're talking about designing a recognition strategy, like Daphne talked about, she's got sister companies across Canada. We often see that, like one company that has an umbrella of companies or multiple departments across countries, or just from team to team, different culture. So when you're thinking about devising a recognition strategy across your business, how do you think about designing that based on location or department or culture? And what are some of the challenges that you've had to face and solve? Kelly, maybe I'll let you go first.
Thank you. So I've actually found, because the two places that I've implemented Bucketlist in, I can tell you Bucketlist was actually a really great tool for us to bring people together and across the different companies and sites and locations. So I had one organization where multiple companies working very differently, very separate. And it was a good tool to be able to recognize and appreciate people across companies and get cross-functional teams and cross org teams working together. And then at Momentum, Money Mart, we have stores all over the place. And in a lot of our locations, we only have 1 or 2 people working in a store at a time by themselves. So it can feel very isolating. But to be able to go onto Bucketlist and be recognized, but also see recognition and then jump into other people's recognitions in your district or across your region or across just the company or different functional areas has been a really great way for us to build on what it was already a good culture, but just make it stronger and make people feel like they weren't so isolated. And then bringing all of our programs that we had onto Bucketlist so that all the recognition is happening on Bucketlist and we're giving out points in Bucketlist. So it's a nice collaborative approach where everything's there, so everyone's using it. So we have very high engagement. We have in the 70% engagement across the org, which is fantastic. But it's been a really great way to recognize everybody and bring people together.
Great, thank you. And Daphne, what about for you?
Yeah. Well, first, I love what Kelly said about bringing everything together. That's key and having the tool for that. Jane and I are probably going to have a conversation after this call about Bucketlist. I know she's in talks with other partners within Navicord. But for us, I can think the biggest challenge for us is ensuring that it's measurable and that we're transparent about what we're measuring when we're doing recognition. So otherwise it can be perceived as more of a popularity contest. My company's quite sales oriented, so it's easy to recognize the sales staff. The numbers speak for themselves. But then we have this other half of our employees who are service or support staff, and they're also vital for our operation. So we ensure that our recognition are in place, while we're trying to be fair with these different groups of employees. But what is meaningful to these groups are different, and it even goes down further than that to the individual level as well.
Yeah, and then you just triggered a thought for me, Daphne, and I think it also breaks down silos when you have an intentional recognition program, because people aren't just recognizing within their own team, they're recognizing across department and showing gratitude for the collaboration that's happening within the company.
Mhm.
And I just also want to mention that Daphne and I did not plan our outfits today.
I know, I saw that.
So I think that leads into the next question I wanted to talk about a little bit, and that I hear this question all the time. It's a concern that constantly comes up, and that's how do you ensure your program is inclusive and equitable across your organization? And Kelly, would you like to kick us off there?
Yeah, sure. So this is something that's very important to us at Momentum and Money Mart, making sure that we've got equity and fairness across all of our groups. So I think there's a couple different ways that you can make sure that it's equitable. So if you're looking at just day-to-day recognition, obviously the platform is a good equalizer because everyone has access to it. Everyone can go in and recognize, which was something I appreciated about the platform. It wasn't just managers doing recognition. What I really loved was the peer-to-peer recognition, because that actually was a very big driver, both for us here and then in the last time that I did an implementation. It was really good. But I think making sure that just reminders to leaders as you roll out the program, but also as you're reviewing the program to make sure that, it's the idea of don't always, to Daphne's point, salespeople, it's very easy because wow, you had a really great month. Not just your top salesperson or your top performer in the store, who's making good changes, who, maybe they're approving, so you want to recognize that. Maybe someone went other way for a customer, you definitely want to recognize that behavior. So reminding leaders that you need to look across your team and you're not recognizing the same person every single time. And then as we have programs like awards programs that we use, people get nominated through the platform, and then we review the nominations and leaders make selections. Reviewing as you go through your programs, is everybody included? Are you including your head office and your frontline staff? Does everyone get an opportunity to be recognized? I think is also key. And what's nice to see is organically what I've seen is people naturally start to use the recognition platform to recognize, yes, you did a great job, or yes, you helped a customer, but just also different events. Like we just had International Women's Day, and the number of posts of they would tag 20 or 30 women that they worked with and said like, happy International Women's Day. It was so nice. Like, I love working with you. That's really nice to see too. And again, it goes back to that sense of creating community and just enhancing culture.
Great, thank you. And Daphne, what would you like to share?
Yeah, I think, for us, it's a little bit more difficult because we don't have a platform in place. So it's quite manual. And there's lots of reminders, much like Kelly said, reminders to our leaders to look across the organization, across various teams, across others on teams that made a difference to their team, not necessarily their direct reports. But what we do try to do is outside of the intentional reminders. We conduct quarterly employee focus groups so that we ensure that we're hitting the mark on the various types of employees from various offices, or some people are in hybrid work modes and some people are fully remote. So those are other factors that we need to consider it as well. We're quite spread across BC. Kelly's organization spread across even wider than that. So there are definitely differences in terms of demographics as well as the physical location.
That's actually something we haven't really talked about, is like in office versus remote. Do you see like any specific like differences in recognition or engagement that way? Or
Yeah, yeah. I think for
how are you
those,
intentional about recognizing?
yeah, for me, my team is hybrid and or remote, my direct team. So I know that I need to go out of my way. Naturally, I am naturally quite social, but I do need to go more out of my way for those that are fully remote to make sure that there's connection and make sure that, they know I know what they're working on, that I appreciate it. And I do translate that, in the leaders that I work with, that they need to be reminded of that. It is even more intentional when you are not physically seeing the person.
Mhm. Kelly, anything you wanted to
Yeah,
share?
I think that's a great point because it's an interesting time right now because you've got that mix of people who are in office, hybrid, and then the remote population. So again, how do you create that sense of consistency and also equity too? Because I find there's people gravitate towards, well, if you're near the office, you guys can come in and we can have, a social or an event or something like that where you can be in person. Well, you by doing that exclude all the people who are remote who can't come in for that. So finding ways to recognize the folks who are remote or hybrid in an equal way really, really makes a difference. So a great example is we had Employee Appreciation Week last year. We did have a breakfast social for folks in the office, and my team came up with the great idea that we would send Tim Hortons or Starbucks gift cards to all of our remote employees so that they got to participate too, which was a nice way to kind of equal it out. But it's definitely a consideration to make sure that people don't feel like you have to be in the office for FaceTime or you have to be in the office to get that recognition or appreciation. You should get that no matter where you're working.
Yeah, that's a nice idea, because I think it's like if you're all remote, then you can plan events for all remote. But when you get into hybrid with some people being remote, it's like, how do you intentionally include everybody? I think one other thing that I've seen companies do is recognize the people who are giving, or not recognize, but celebrate people who are giving the recognition, right? So instead of, you can track all the people who received the recognition, but also who is giving it out, and celebrating those people who are also leading by example, whether it's a leader or not. It's like someone who is just sharing and giving feedback. I think that's a great champion of culture for the company. Okay. Let's talk about some like actionable advice. And Daphne, what advice would you give to leaders who are looking to elevate their recognition program? Do you have a couple pieces?
Yeah, advice to elevate. I think, it's kind of like my theme is the intentionality, be open to that, be open to new ideas. Yeah, I think that might be my key one. I keep threading that theme in, and just being open and curious about implementing something like this.
Okay. I know one of the things you talked about is trying to help people be intentional about giving recognition. And we all know some people are good at it and some people, it's not top of mind. So how do you talked a little bit about reminding people, is there any specific things that you do to scale that as opposed to just reminding them yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I personally just try to lead by example myself. So I tell anybody who ends up having a meeting with me or ends up getting a praise. So what we do, we're on the Microsoft platform, and there is a way to do a praise. It's basically like a little certificate, and you send it through them through like a messenger. That's kind of like what we do here. I make a point every Friday. I think about my week at the end of the week, and I think about who really made an impact or difference that, I really want to thank. And then I write a very, personal message about it, but I don't just thank them for doing that because, a lot of the times that may or may not just be part of their jobs or they went above and beyond. I talk about the impact that it made because of what they did. And then when I do that, I talk about it, and then usually it's received really well. They feel good. And I just say, hey, I do this every Friday. Like, feel free if you want to like put like just a quick 15 minutes in your calendar at the end of the week and pass this on. Like it just think how much it meant to you that you receive this, how much it would mean to somebody else receiving that. Yeah. So I try to sprinkle that into my week when I do that every Friday.
It's like a culture of
Mhm.
recognition. You give recognition and ask them to pass it along,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? And Kelly, what recommendations would you have? Like, what action can people take away for what advice would you give them?
Yeah. I think going back to our first question, recognition is very important. It really does make a difference, and it's a great lever for you to pull in terms of elevating what the offering is for your organization in terms of employee experience. For those that want to implement a recognition program, I think, look at the different platforms that are out there. I'm obviously biased because I've implemented Bucketlist twice. But I think look at the platforms out there. I think the peer-to-peer, having employees be able to recognize each other is a really big driver for your culture. I think that's a huge thing. And I think the other big thing that's really important when you're considering a recognition program is the ability for personalized rewards. That's a key thing because we've all we've all gotten something through our careers where you get like a mug. We all have too many mugs. You get a mug or like a shirt or something you're never going to wear. And it's like, well, that's nice, but like, what am I going to do with this? Now it's like cluttering my house versus getting something that you actually can use or actually want. That makes a big difference too. And I've personally seen in the two implementations I've done, that's a big driver because people will like tell you they're saving up for something and they're like super excited when they get it. That is like, that's important because that's something that people also go home and they tell their family about because they're really excited. That's amazing. So those are two things when you're looking at platforms, definitely peer-to-peer, personalized rewards. I think those make a big difference. And in terms of getting it out there and getting leaders to actually use it and make it, I think to Daphne's point, being intentional, making it part of your week. I'm going to go put a reminder on Fridays on my calendar. Thank you, Daphne. But making it intentional is a big thing. And just remind people, how would you feel? Like, think back to those times where you got recognized or you didn't. What kind of culture do you want to have? And so if everybody's making that effort to recognize people on a daily basis, recognition just becomes part of your culture. And naturally, people are going to want to stay. They're going to want to work harder, and it's going to be a better place for everybody.
Yeah, I've had leaders who reported to me in the past, and you can see one being great at recognition and rewarding her team, recognizing birthdays, anniversaries, and then the other leader who not his forte. And you could really see the impact of the culture there, just on one teams within the greater sales organization. Not bucket list, this is a past job, but I think the idea, just a simple book some time on your calendar and do that regardless of whether you're using a platform or you're not. It's a great way to remind yourself to give out that recognition. Okay. Any other pieces of advice that you would give? Daphne or Kelly?
I think the one other thing I'll just say from launching it, picking a fun way to launch it, whether it's the start of an employee appreciation week or employee appreciation day, or the first implementation we did it on Halloween, so everyone dressed up, and we actually used it to do a costume contest the first day. But thinking of a fun way to launch it that gets people immediately in there using it, I think is really helpful. And then, like I said before, all of your programs. So if you've got health and safety programs where you're recognizing sites for good safety, sales programs, so sales incentives, things like that, drive all of those programs into your recognition program. So everybody's consistently thinking and using that program. They're thinking about it. But people will naturally get pulled on to look at the wall to see, their own recognition, but then they end up liking and commenting on other stuff too. Again, it just helps drive the culture and drive up your engagement.
And anything else for you, Daphne?
Yeah, I think just to add out about recognition, and we talked about personalization, being intentional. Then there's the day-to-day. When right now, where my company is right now, we're doing a kind of a blitz of a peer-to-peer recognition program. It is very manual, I will say. My poor team has to manually do that, but it is based on nomination, peer-to-peer. But what we did was we actually tied it to something deeper, and it was our company values. So it's when the employees are doing a great job, but that it's connected to one of our values. I think it really just like threads and really breeds that ground for recognition, but then just into all of it, into the culture and the values. So that's what we do. If there's a way you can thread it into something deeper, then by all means, put it in there.
Yeah, I think you just raised a really important point that we had not talked about yet, and that is incorporating your company values into your recognition program. I think we've all worked for companies where we've seen the company live and breathe their values, and we've probably worked for companies where they're just on the website and you can't even recite them off of the top of your head. So I think being able to incorporate that into your recognition strategy just ties it back to the company culture, and it is such an important point, is that you want to tie those things in and really have your people living by your values.